The moment David Woolley opened his mouth at the sister wives tell-all, you could have heard a pin drop in that studio. For nearly 2 decades, Kody Brown has positioned himself as the untouchable patriarch, the alpha male of his sprawling plural family, the man whose authority was never ever questioned on camera. And then, in one electrifying exchange, Christine's new husband did what none of the wives, the children, or the production team had ever managed to do. He looked Kody dead in the eyes and called him out on his manipulation tactics in front of millions of viewers. The expression on Kody's face was absolutely priceless, a mixture of shock, rage, and something that looked remarkably like fear. Sources who were present at the filming say the tension in that room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Christine sat there watching her new husband defend her honor, and insiders claim her expression was one of pure validation. After 18 years of being told she was not pretty enough, not spiritual enough, not worthy of Kody's attention and affection, she finally had a partner willing to stand up and say what everyone watching at home has been screaming at their televisions for years. Kody's behavior was not leadership, it was control, it was manipulation, and David was not going to let him gaslight anyone in that room. Let us be brutally honest here. Kody has never faced anything like this before. Throughout the entire run of Sister Wives, he has operated in an environment where his authority went fundamentally unchallenged. Sure, the wives pushed back occasionally, Janelle rolled her eyes, Christine made passive-aggressive comments, Meri retreated into silence. But never, not once, did another man sit across from him and systematically dismantle his carefully constructed narrative of victimhood. David Woolley changed that forever, and watching Kody struggle to respond revealed just how fragile his entire persona really was. The cracks that appeared in Kody's facade during that confrontation cannot be patched over with his usual deflection tactics. One insider put it bluntly, saying Kody looked like a man whose entire world was crumbling, and he had no idea how to stop it. Another source close to production noted that the energy in the room shifted completely after David spoke, as if everyone suddenly had permission to see what had been obvious all along. The Emperor had no clothes, and finally someone was brave enough to point it out. What makes this confrontation so significant is not just the moment itself, but what it exposed about the dynamics that have driven this family apart over the past several years. David did not just defend Christine. He held up a mirror to Kody's behavior and forced everyone in that room to see what they had been trying to ignore. And folks, once you see something like that, you cannot unsee it. The wives who remained loyal, the family members who tried to stay neutral, even Robin, who has stood by Kody through every controversy, they all had to confront the reality of who Kody Brown really is. This tell-all was not just another reunion episode thrown together to boost ratings during a slow season. This was arguably the most anticipated Sister Wives reunion in the show's entire 15-year history, and the anticipation had everything to do with one man who was never supposed to be there. David Woolley's presence at that tell-all changed the fundamental chemistry of what viewers have come to expect from these gatherings. For the first time, Christine had someone in her corner who was not intimidated by Kody's bluster, someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain by speaking the truth. Production sources say the decision to include David was controversial behind the scenes. Some worried it would shift the focus away from the family dynamics that fans tune in to see. Others argued that David's perspective as an outsider who fell in love with one of Kody's former wives would add a dimension the show desperately needed. What no one predicted, according to insiders who spoke about the filming, was just how completely David would dominate the conversation once he decided to speak up. He came prepared, he came calm, and he came with receipts. Think about this for a moment. Kody Brown has been the only adult male presence in Sister Wives family discussions for nearly 2 decades. He has enjoyed the unique position of being able to control the narrative, to frame every disagreement as the wives being difficult or emotional or spiritual failures. There was never another man to challenge his interpretation of events, to offer an alternative masculine perspective, to simply say no, that is not how a real man treats the women in his life. David Woolley walked into that tell-all and became exactly that counterpoint, and Kody clearly had no idea how to handle it. Insiders reveal that Kody's demeanor changed almost immediately when David was introduced. One source described it as watching a peacock suddenly realize there was a bigger bird in the room. Another noted that Kody kept trying to reassert his dominance through interruptions and dismissive body language, but David simply would not take the bait. His calm confidence stood in stark contrast to Kody's increasingly agitated responses, and the comparison was absolutely devastating for the Brown patriarch. Let that sink in for a moment. After all these years of positioning himself as the strong leader of his family, Kody was outclassed by a man who barely had to raise his voice. The significance of this dynamic shift cannot be overstated. David's presence did not just change one tell-all episode. It fundamentally altered the power structure that Sister Wives has operated under since the very beginning. For the first time, viewers got to see what Kody looks like when he cannot control the room, when he cannot manipulate the conversation, when he cannot retreat behind religious authority or patriarchal entitlement. And folks, it was not pretty. The confrontation was just the beginning of what sources are calling Kody's complete unraveling. For nearly 20 years, Kody Brown has ruled his plural family through a sophisticated system of psychological manipulation that would make a cult leader proud. Let us be absolutely clear about what we are discussing here. This was not traditional religious leadership. This was not even the benevolent patriarchy that Kody constantly claimed to practice. This was control, pure and simple, dressed up in spiritual language and enabled by wives who had been conditioned from childhood to submit to male authority. Understanding this history is essential to appreciating why David's confrontation was so devastating to Kody's carefully constructed image. The pattern was always the same. Kody would pit the wives against each other, playing favorites in ways that kept everyone competing for his attention and approval. Sources who have observed the family dynamics over the years describe it as a classic divide-and-conquer strategy. By ensuring the wives never formed a united front against him, Kody maintained absolute control over decision-making. He could tell Christine she was not romantic enough while praising Robin's spirituality. Icy could criticize Janelle's independence while holding her up as an example when Meri wanted more attention. The wives were so busy trying to please him and outdo each other that they never stopped to question whether the game itself was rigged. The religious framework provided perfect cover for this manipulation. As the head of household in their fundamentalist belief system, Kody's word was essentially law. He could frame any resistance as spiritual rebellion, any criticism as an attack on the family structure ordained by God himself. One former insider described it as genius-level manipulation, noting that Kody had convinced these women that questioning him was the same as questioning their faith. That is an incredibly powerful tool for control, and Kody wielded it ruthlessly whenever his authority was challenged. But here is where the system started to break down. The Sister Wives cameras captured everything, and slowly but surely, the wives began comparing notes. They watched the episodes, they saw how differently Kody treated them, they noticed the favoritism that Kody denied existed. Christine has spoken openly about realizing that Kody treated Robin completely differently, and that realization was the beginning of the end of her tolerance for the manipulation. Janelle reached similar conclusions through her own observations. Even Meri, who has been the most reluctant to criticize Kody publicly, has made comments suggesting she finally sees the patterns she once refused to acknowledge. The exodus of wives from the family represents the spectacular failure of Kody's control system. Once one wife left and spoke openly about her experiences, it gave others permission to examine their own situations more critically. Christine leaving was not just a divorce. It was a crack in the dam that Kody had spent decades building. And when she found David, when she showed the world what a healthy relationship actually looked like, that crack became a flood that threatened to wash away everything Kody had constructed. David had clearly studied this playbook, and according to sources close to the tell-all filming, he came absolutely prepared to dismantle it piece by piece in front of everyone watching. Christine Brown's fairy tale romance with David Woolley was supposed to be her happy ending, her reward for finally finding the courage to leave an emotionally abusive situation and start fresh. But for Kody Brown, watching his ex-wife find genuine happiness with another man was not inspiring or heartwarming. It was a direct threat to his ego on a level that nothing else in the Sister Wives saga has managed to achieve. David represents everything Kody claimed to be but spectacularly failed to deliver. And that comparison has been eating at the Brown patriarch since the moment Christine posted her first photo with her new man. Let us examine the contrast here because it is absolutely brutal for Kody. David Woolley shows up for Christine. He attends her family events. He supports her business ventures. He publicly celebrates her in ways that Kody never did during their entire 18-year marriage. Sources close to Christine say that watching David interact with her children has been revelatory, noting that he treats them with a respect and attention that Kody reserved only for Robin's kids. The difference is not subtle. It is a canyon-wide gap between how these two men approach partnership and every Everyone watching Sister Wives can see it clear as day. Fans noticed Kody's jealousy brewing long before the tell-all confrontation. In earlier episodes, whenever Christine's new relationship came up, Kody's body language shifted noticeably. He would cross his arms, set his jaw, make dismissive comments about Christine moving on too quickly, or David not understanding what he was getting into with such a large blended family. One viewer commentary that went viral described Kody as looking like a toddler who just watched another kid play with a toy he threw away. And honestly, that assessment is not far from the truth. The jealousy makes sense from a psychological perspective, even if it makes Kody look incredibly petty. For years, Kody's identity was wrapped up in being the man that multiple women chose to share. His ego fed on the attention of plural wives competing for his favor. When Christine not only left but thrived without him, it challenged Kody's fundamental belief in his own irreplaceability. When she found a man who treated her better, who made her happier, who showed up in ways Kody never bothered to, it exposed the lie that Kody had told himself for decades. Maybe the problem was never the wives. Maybe the problem was always him. Insiders reveal that Kody made several attempts to control the narrative around Christine's new relationship before the tell-all aired. He allegedly pushed for David to be excluded from filming, arguing that it would make the episode about him rather than the family. When that failed, sources say Kody tried to establish ground rules about what topics would be off-limits. Production reportedly pushed back, recognizing that the David and Kody dynamic was exactly the kind of drama that Sister Wives needed after several seasons of repetitive conflicts. The tell-all would force these two men into direct confrontation whether Kody liked it or not, and anyone paying attention knew that David was not going to back down. The moment David spoke up during the tell-all, the entire room went absolutely silent in a way that production sources say they have never experienced in 15 seasons of filming Sister Wives. There was no interruption from Kody, no defensive commentary from Robin, no awkward attempts to change the subject. Everyone present seemed to understand instinctively that something significant was happening, that the rules of engagement that had governed these family discussions for nearly 2 decades were being fundamentally rewritten in real time. David had the floor, and he clearly intended to use it. The specific exchange that sent shockwaves through social media began when David calmly addressed Kody's pattern of rewriting history. According to viewers who analyzed the footage, David looked directly at Kody and essentially said that he had watched how Kody treated Christine for years before ever meeting her, and what he witnessed was manipulation disguised as spiritual leadership. He referenced specific incidents that fans had seen play out on camera, moments where Kody dismissed Christine's concerns or prioritized other wives in ways that were clearly designed to keep her insecure and compliant. It was a methodical takedown delivered without raising his voice, and Kody was completely unprepared for it. Robin's reaction during this confrontation told its own devastating story. As David laid out his observations, Robin shifted uncomfortably, her usual composure cracking in ways that sharp-eyed viewers immediately noticed. She attempted to interject several times, presumably to defend Kody or redirect the conversation, but David simply continued speaking with the calm authority of someone who had nothing to fear. One insider described Robin as looking trapped, noting that she could not deny the specific examples David referenced because they had all aired publicly. Her discomfort was palpable, and it suggested that even she recognized the validity of what David was saying. Christine's expression during this entire exchange is perhaps the most important detail of all. Sources present at the filming say she had tears in her eyes, not from sadness but from what appeared to be overwhelming validation. After years of being told she was the problem, of having her concerns dismissed and her feelings minimized, she was watching a man she loved lay out the truth in a forum where it could not be ignored. One viewer commentary that resonated with many described Christine as finally getting to see someone else confirm what she knew in her heart all along. That validation was written all over her face. Let us be brutally honest about what David accomplished in that moment. He did not just defend his wife. He exposed the manipulation tactics that Kody has used on all of his wives for the entire run of Sister Wives. By naming the behavior specifically, by refusing to accept Kody's attempts at deflection, David gave language to patterns that viewers had sensed but could not quite articulate. He translated what millions of people had been feeling into clear, undeniable observations that could not be dismissed as jealousy or misunderstanding. And Kody's response to this exposure revealed far more about his character than he ever intended to show. Backed into a corner with nowhere to hide, Kody Brown resorted to the same deflection tactics he has used throughout his entire time on Sister Wives, but this time with David sitting calmly across from him, those tactics failed spectacularly spectacularly in ways that expose just how dependent Kody has always been on having no one willing to challenge him directly. The defensive spiral that followed David's confrontation was painful to watch, not because anyone felt sympathy for Kody, but because it laid bare the emptiness behind his carefully constructed patriarch persona. The first thing Kody tried was his classic blame shift maneuver. Instead of addressing David's specific observations about manipulation, Kody attempted to turn the conversation back to Christine's perceived failures as a wife. He reportedly brought up grievances from their marriage, attempting to frame himself as the victim of an ungrateful spouse who never appreciated his spiritual leadership. Sources say David shut this down immediately, pointing out that Kody's attempt to attack Christine's character only proved the point about his manipulation tactics. The man was literally demonstrating the behavior David had just called out, and the irony was absolutely staggering. Next came the religious authority card that has served Kody so well over the years. According to viewers who analyzed his response, Kody tried to frame David as an outsider who could not possibly understand the spiritual dimensions of plural marriage. This was a transparent attempt to delegitimize David's observations by positioning him as unqualified to comment on family dynamics he had not lived himself. But David, who has been openly supportive of Christine processing her complicated religious journey, simply would not accept that framing. He reportedly noted that you do not need to be a member of a cult to recognize cult behavior, a line that reportedly drew visible reactions from everyone in the room. What made Kody's defensive spiral even more damaging was Janelle's response to the exchange. According to sources present at the filming, Janelle was visibly nodding along with many of David's observations. At one point, she reportedly added her own commentary, affirming that the patterns David described matched her experience exactly. This was devastating for Kody because he could no longer dismiss the criticism as coming from an outsider with an agenda. One of his own wives, someone who had tried harder than anyone to maintain a functional co-parenting relationship with him, was essentially co-signing everything David said. The spiral continued as Kody grew increasingly agitated, his voice rising while David's remained steady. Viewers noted that Kody's face flushed, his gestures became more aggressive, and his arguments grew more scattered as he realized none of his usual tactics were working. One insider described it as watching a system failure in real time, noting that Kody had simply never developed tools for dealing with pushback from someone who was not conditioned to defer to him. He had no playbook for this situation, and his improvisation was absolutely disastrous for his image. Let that sink in for a moment. After decades of successfully manipulating conversations to maintain his victim status, Kody encountered someone who simply refused to play by his rules. And without those rules protecting him, without the deference he had come to expect, Kody revealed himself as exactly what David described. His loss of control during that exchange triggered an even more explosive reaction that sources say continued long after cameras stopped rolling. For the entire duration of Sister Wives, Robin has played the role of peacemaker and Kody defender, smoothing over his worst moments with explanations and context that somehow made his behavior seem more reasonable. But during the tell-all confrontation with David, that role became impossible to maintain. For the first time in 15 seasons, Robin could not find the words to defend her husband because the defense simply did not exist. David's observations were too specific, too well documented by the show itself, and too obviously accurate to be spun into something more palatable. The attempted damage control was almost painful to watch, according to sources present at the filming. Robin tried several different approaches, first suggesting that David did not have the full context for situations he had only seen edited on television. David reportedly countered that editing could not create behavior that did not exist, and that the patterns he described had played out across hundreds of episodes spanning more than a decade. She then tried to redirect to the positive aspects of their family, only to have Janelle interject that those positives had largely evaporated since Kody chose to prioritize his relationship with Robin over everyone else. Speculation has swirled for years about tension between Kody and Robin behind closed doors, and the tell-all exchange only added fuel to those rumors. Insiders suggest that Robin has grown increasingly frustrated with Kody's inability to maintain relationships with his other children and his alienation of family members who once supported them. One source close to the situation described their dynamic as strained, noting that Robin did not sign up to be the villain of this story, and yet that is exactly how the public sees her because of Kody's failures. If accurate, this represents a significant shift from the united front they have presented throughout most of the series. The supporting content surrounding this tell-all has included fascinating speculation about whether Robin might be orchestrating her own exit strategy. While this remains unconfirmed, sources point to subtle changes in her public statements, a slightly more critical tone when discussing Kody's decisions, and what appears to be a deliberate effort to distance herself from his most controversial positions. Some viewers have noted that Robyn's defense of Kody during the David confrontation seemed half-hearted at best, as if she was going through the motions rather than genuinely believing what she was saying. Let us be brutally honest about Robyn's position here, because it is genuinely complicated even if sympathy for her is hard to muster. She has built her entire adult life around being Kody's favorite wife, the one he chose over all others, the one whose children he actually parents. If that favoritism has destroyed his relationships with everyone else in the family, she bears responsibility for accepting benefits she knew came at others' expense. But she is also now isolated with a man whose public image has never been worse, whose other relationships have collapsed, and whose behavior David just exposed in front of millions of viewers. That is not an enviable position regardless of how she arrived there. Insiders suggest that the tell-all filming represented a turning point that reverberated through the Brown household long after the cameras stopped rolling. One source described it as a wake-up call for Robyn, suggesting that watching David systematically dismantle Kody's narrative forced her to confront realities she had previously avoided. Whether this leads to actual change in their relationship remains to be seen, but the dynamics between Kody and Robyn will never be quite the same after what happened in that studio. David's challenge accomplished something that years of plural marriage and countless family discussions never managed to achieve. It united the former Brown wives in a shared moment of recognition and vindication that transcended their complicated history with each other. Watching Kody get confronted by someone who refused to back down gave Christine, Janelle, and even Meri a shared experience that may have done more for their relationships with each other than any formal attempt at reconciliation could have accomplished. Christine and Janelle's solidarity during the tell-all was visible to anyone watching. According to sources present at the filming, the two women exchanged glances throughout David's confrontation with Kody, small nods and expressions that communicated volumes without words. Their friendship has strengthened considerably since both left their marriages to Kody, and watching David defend Christine while articulating observations that applied equally to Janelle's experience created a bonding moment that viewers found deeply moving. One insider noted that it felt like watching sisters finally see their abuser get called out, a validation that both women desperately needed. Meri's reaction was more complicated, which makes sense given her unique position within the family dynamics. She has been emotionally divorced from Kody for years, according to her own statements, yet she remained technically married to him longer than Christine or Janelle. Sources say her expression during David's confrontation shifted between agreement and what appeared to be regret, perhaps recognizing her own experiences in the patterns being described while grappling with why she stayed so long. Her complicated history with Kody's control tactics makes her perspective particularly interesting, and viewers noted several moments where she seemed on the verge of adding her own observations before holding back. Mykelti's recent revelations about family tensions and choosing sides have added additional context to how the David confrontation is reverberating through the extended Brown family. Christine's daughter has been increasingly open about the divisions within the family, particularly regarding how Kody's behavior has affected his relationships with his adult children. Her support for David and her willingness to speak openly about family dynamics suggests that the next generation is firmly on the side of those who have left Kody's orbit. This generational shift represents perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of Kody's behavior patterns being exposed so publicly. The unity among the wives, tentative and complicated as it may be, represents a fundamental power shift that Kody never anticipated and has no idea how to address. For decades, his control depended on keeping these women separated, competing with each other, too focused on their individual grievances to recognize their shared experience. David's confrontation stripped away the divisions and allowed them to see each other as allies rather than competitors. One source described it as the moment they stopped being sister wives and started being sisters, bound by shared trauma rather than shared husband. Let us appreciate the irony here, because it is absolutely delicious. Kody spent years trying to prevent exactly this kind of unity among his wives, understanding instinctively that a united front would end his ability to control the narrative, and yet his own behavior, his own inability to treat any of them with basic respect and dignity, ultimately created exactly the solidarity he feared. David did not create this unity, he simply provided the catalyst that allowed feelings that had been building for years to finally crystallize into something tangible. The fallout from this confrontation is still reverberating through every branch of the Brown family. Sources close to the situation say Kody Brown has not been the same since the tell-all filming, and honestly, how could he be after what happened in that studio? studio. The man walked in expecting another easily managed family discussion where his version of events would go largely unchallenged, and instead he experienced the most thorough public dismantling of his character in the entire history of the franchise. The psychological impact of that confrontation appears to be significant, and the aftermath has reportedly affected everything from his relationship with production to his willingness to participate in future filming. Reported tension between Kody and the Sister Wives production team has apparently escalated significantly since the tell-all aired. According to insiders, Kody was furious about how the confrontation was presented, believing that editing choices made him look worse than the actual exchange warranted. Production sources push back on this interpretation, noting that they actually cut some of the most damaging moments to maintain broadcast standards and family television guidelines. One insider put it bluntly, saying they showed maybe 60% of what actually happened, and Kody should be grateful they held back as much as they did. Speculation has already begun about whether Kody will refuse to participate in future tell-alls if David is present. Sources say Kody has made his feelings clear to production, essentially issuing an ultimatum that he will not sit across from Christine's husband again. This creates an interesting dilemma for the show, since David's presence clearly delivered the most compelling tell-all content in years. One production source described it as Kody trying to control the narrative again, noting that his refusal to face David only makes him look more guilty of everything he was accused of. The man cannot win either way at this point. Fan reactions to the tell-all have been overwhelmingly celebratory regarding David's role in the confrontation. Social media was flooded with posts praising him as the hero Sister Wives has needed for 15 seasons, the person who finally said out loud what viewers have been screaming at their screens since the early episodes. One viral tweet described David as doing 15 years of therapy for the entire Brown family in a single tell-all appearance. The sentiment was echoed across platforms, with viewers expressing gratitude that someone finally held Kody accountable in a forum he could not escape. The biggest consequence of this confrontation may be what it means for the future of Sister Wives as a whole. Season 20 filming is reportedly already underway, and sources suggest that the David confrontation has fundamentally altered the show's direction. Production is apparently leaning into the accountability angle, recognizing that viewers are no longer interested in watching Kody avoid consequences for his behavior. One insider teased that what they have planned for next season makes the tell-all look like a warm-up, suggesting that Kody's days of controlling the Sister Wives narrative are definitively over. Let us be clear about what this moment represents in the larger arc of the show. For 15 seasons, Sister Wives has operated according to rules that protected Kody Brown from the full consequences of his choices. Producers softened his worst moments, editors balanced criticism with humanizing content, the wives themselves moderated their language out of concern for their children and lingering loyalty. David Woolley walked into that tell-all with none of those constraints, and his willingness to speak plainly about what he observed may have permanently changed what Sister Wives can be. David Woolley's confrontation with Kody Brown at the Sister Wives tell-all will be remembered as a turning point, not just for this season, but for the entire 15-year history of the franchise. For the first time, someone held up an unfiltered mirror to Kody's behavior and refused to look away, refused to accept excuses, refused to let deflection tactics redirect the conversation. In doing so, David accomplished what countless family discussions, therapy sessions, and tearful confessionals never could. He made Kody see himself the way everyone else has seen him for years. The question of whether Kody can ever recover his patriarch image after this exposure seems almost rhetorical at this point. The careful construction that sustained his position for 2 decades, the religious authority, the head of household entitlement, the narrative of being a misunderstood man doing his best for his family, all of it crumbled under David's calm and methodical examination. You cannot unsee what viewers watched happen in that studio. You cannot unhear the observations that named the manipulation tactics so precisely. Kody's image is not damaged. It is fundamentally destroyed in ways that no amount of spin can repair. Perhaps the most significant long-term impact of this confrontation will be whether it inspires more people within the Brown family orbit to speak openly about their experiences. The wives who have left have been remarkably measured in their public statements, choosing their words carefully out of concern for their children, and perhaps some lingering hesitation about fully condemning the father of those children. David showed that direct accountability is possible, that naming the behavior specifically does not destroy families but but rather frees people to process their experiences. Honestly, that example may empower others to share their truths in ways they previously felt unable to attempt. The sister-wives saga has always been complicated, a mixture of genuine family love, religious conviction, personal dysfunction, and the distorting influence of reality television cameras documenting everything. But through all of that complexity, certain truths have emerged that even the most sympathetic interpretation of events cannot obscure. Kody Brown treated the women in his life as extensions of his ego rather than partners deserving respect. He used religious authority to justify control and manipulation. He played favorites in ways that damaged every relationship in his family. And when finally confronted with these realities by someone who refused to back down, he revealed himself as exactly what his critics always said he was. So now the question falls to you, the viewers who have followed this family through divorces and relocations and endless drama. Do you think David was right to confront Kody directly at the tell-all, or should he have stayed out of family business that technically predates his relationship with Christine? Was it his place to speak up for the wives, or did he overstep boundaries that should have been respected regardless of his observations? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is one of those situations where reasonable people might genuinely disagree about the best approach. What we can probably all agree on is that sister wives will never be the same after what happened in that studio, and frankly, that change was long overdue.